Hi, I'm here with David Guru. David, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really looking forward to chatting.
Oh, I'm excited to discuss the use of visual storytelling in medical treatment and the effects of visual communications altogether. But before we start, let me ask you, what is your background and what's the story behind adopting visual tools for your practice?
Sure. Yeah. Maybe I'll start with what I'm actually doing now, and then we kind of go back in time because it'll make a little bit more sense. But I am a radiation oncologist. So I'm a physician who treats cancer patients. And we use, unlike medical oncologists who use chemotherapy, we use X-rays to treat cancer. So that's what I do. That's my day job. But my background and my sort of how I got to here is a little bit more of a tortuous path. So I started off in undergraduate as someone who was studying um, tropical ecology.
Mhm.
And I got into that just curious about sort of the way that different sort of organisms interact with each other. And as part of that program, I ended up going to study in Ecuador and spent some time in the Galapagos Islands. And we're studying the concept of evolution. And um, so, as part of that curriculum, we were studying. I don't know if you're familiar with Darwin's finches, are you?
Um,
Okay, so
but if you could explain
basically,
that
this is
to
a
us,
group.
yeah.
Yeah, so Darwin's finches are a group of 18 different species of birds, and they're all living in the Galapagos Islands, and they are very closely related. They look similar, however, they all have different, slightly different shaped beaks, and so they've adapted to eat different kinds of things on the island. And in doing so, they over time they've developed different shaped beaks. Some are very large and can crack nuts. Some are tiny and they can go into holes and collect insects. And so this concept, this visual concept of structure matching function as a way that an organism evolves over time really locked into my brain. And you could read as much as you want about um, the concept of natural selection and evolution. But once I saw the image of that, I
Mhm.
could not shake that from my brain. And that really locked that in. So I ended up deciding not to be an ecologist, but the idea, the concept of using visual images to really get to the core of understanding complex concepts like natural selection stayed with me. So after college, I ended up doing some teaching. I was mostly doing whiteboard teaching for pre-medical students to understand how to take the pre-medical exam to enter into medical school.
Mhm.
And I continued doing that through medical school. So I was kind of taking this skill of using images to convey complex concepts and using it in whiteboard teaching. And I probably did about 1,000 hours of that over the course of 3 or 4 years or so. And then,
Wow.
yeah, so there was a lot of experience in that. Um, in any event, after finishing med school, doing residency and everything, I'm now in practice, and I've kind of kept up with not the whiteboard with my patients, but using pen and paper mostly to explain anatomy, to get these ideas across complex situations like pancreatic cancer, or for instance, or brain cancer, for a patient who has no medical background, and using pen and paper illustrations to try and convey some of those concepts. So I'll stop there, take a breath, but that's basically kind of the arc of my story.
That's great. And this is actually the topic of our conversation today. So I would frame it as, you know, the way to improve health literacy. And the way I understand health literacy is it happens when patients and health providers can communicate in the ways that they can understand each other, right?
Absolutely, yeah, and that's so important. Just give you kind of a scenario. This is sort of an extreme scenario, but a patient who is in fact cured of cancer, right? It's gone and it's never coming back. If they don't understand that concept, that the cancer is under control, it's cured, it's never going to come back. If they don't understand that, I would argue that they're actually not cured, because psychologically they're still suffering from that disease. And with some cancers, it's the psychological suffering that's actually the most profound effect on patients. And so in that sense, health literacy in its most extreme form results in cure, a psychological cure, but it results in cure. On the flip side, a patient who really understands well that they don't have long to live, because their doctor has done an excellent job of explaining, a dire circumstance. If they know they have 3 months left, every day, every hour, every minute of that 3 months is incredibly meaningful for them. And if they don't have good health education and health literacy on that, then they may be wasting some time and not doing the things that they would be wanting to do as they kind of approach the end of their life,
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. What I'm very interested about is how the bridge is built between your level of understanding of what's going on within the patient's body and what patient is ready to take in and comprehend, right? Because we know that visuals can be helpful, and they are kind of like a visual shortcuts, so to say. And you can use them in different ways. You can use them to motivate, to undergo the treatment, or to interpret the message that you're providing, to support the education, so to say, of patients on effects of therapy on their body. So I wonder, how do you build that bridge? How to build the desired health literacy levels so you can effectively communicate with your patient?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I'm still learning about it, to be honest. I mean, it's kind of an iterative process where you try different things and you kind of see what works. And the other thing that I'll add is that you walk into that patient's room and there's no sign hanging on the door. This person prefers a lengthy verbal explanation. And this one is not going to do well with that and wants pure visual. So there is an art to it. You kind of do have to walk in there and meet them and kind of do a very rapid assessment of what is going to be the best formula for that individual. So that's the art of medicine part. That's very difficult and takes, a career and a lifetime. But what I have tried is basically, I've started digitizing my pen and paper explanations and converting them into short, like 2-minute long videos that are kind of very systematic by different types of cancer. And so I have a 2-minute video on the diagnosis and workup, biopsy scans, and things like that. A 2-minute video on anatomy. Where is this organ? What is it? What does it do? What are the other organs in the area? 2-minute video on the treatment, very brief, not much detail. And then a 2-minute video on what happens after the treatment. How do we know you're cured? What kind of tests, what to expect after therapy? And so it kind of breaks down the arc of a cancer treatment from diagnosis all the way into follow-up and surveillance into these short chapters. They're not meant to be comprehensive. It's not meant to replace my work as a physician, but it does sort of provide a framework, a very simple framework for the patient to kind of just have a starting place, a primer on how they understand their disease and where they are in the arc of that treatment. I'm finding I'm getting good feedback from patients on that. I'm finding that they do find that useful. And so that's kind of where I am right now.
But it's like setting the stage for the main conversation, right?
It is, yeah. So I've tried using these videos before I meet with them. I've tried using it when they're in the waiting room. I've tried using it as a follow-up after treatment. And I think each one kind of has its pluses and minuses. So I haven't stuck with any one formula for going forward. But I do find that whichever setting you use it in, it allows them just a different sort of medium to really absorb the information. And that's the key component of a visual aid, right? It just gives you another way to sort of unlock the understanding. If I explain to a patient in words alone, my 100-word explanation would mean one thing for you and a completely different thing for somebody else, just based on language, their education level, all kinds of other variables, cultural differences. But a simple visual aid is much more objective, and it really transcends cultures, language, education level, if it's simple and well done. And so I find that it is using visual aids become kind of an equalizing force. It narrows gap between education, cultural, economic differences. And in that way, it's incredibly powerful tool.
And it's something that is available. It was, I remember, like 7-10 years ago, it would not be possible to implement such scenario. I mean, you're using tablet, I understand, to create those videos, and you share them with patients, let's say, before the meeting takes place, and they have their smartphones to watch this video on. This is incredible if you think about the access to technology 7 years back, right? The connectivity, the bandwidth of networks, it would not be possible back then, but it is.
Would not.
It's so trivial and so obvious now, right?
And the cost is so low. I mean, I'm doing it in my house. I mean, I'm not a professional, so they're not perfect, but they're good enough that people get the idea. And it's not terribly costly to me, you know? So yeah, the technology has really, it's really remarkable. I had an idea in college to, kind of studying the pre-medical courses, including like biochemistry and things like that. And I had an idea to sort of create a digital curriculum that would take some of these, paper explanations about these complex, multiple step biochemical reactions that take place in the human body. And I just found that very difficult to absorb. So I thought that a better way to learn that would be with a sort of digitized version of that. And I kind of poked around with the idea, but I was in college and I didn't have any money. And the cost to entry at that stage, this was, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, it was completely, the cost to entry was way too high for someone like me. But now college kids could do exactly what I'm doing. All you need is a tablet and some software, and you could build an entire library of visual digital explanations, and it's amazing.
It is, and it's not only that it doesn't have to be pixel perfect, because I assume that when you were checking the cost of production years back, the only option you had was pro-grade animation software, which is costly and cumbersome to use. Now it's just what it is recordable whiteboard, right? And there's one advantage to it that I actually realized, that it's even more important than just the polished look of a video. We don't aim for polished look for the video, but rather we aim for authenticity, right? What do you think about that? Because when you send a video to your patient, what would be the difference in reception if the patient looks like a generic video provided by someone else, but instead what you're doing, you're sending your video. They're going to speak with you during the meeting. But this obviously makes a difference. Am I right?
It does. It is incredibly powerful. And that is one of the more unanticipated effects of this new sort of strategy that I'm employing. And I've read about, using digital aids in medical care for health literacy. And obviously, the internet affords all patients infinite supply of digital resources, but it's overwhelming. It's an ocean, and they don't know how to filter or curate the information from the internet into an applicable and credible bundle. But when they get the information from their doctor, their own doctor who they're going to meet, they don't need to worry about the curation or the credibility. And those are the two most sort of critical things to patients as they seek digital resources. So because those are such high priority for patient consumers, I think you're right, it lowers the bar for what is acceptable in terms of production level. Pixel perfect is just not an issue. If it's from my doctor, that's what I want. I trust this person. It's the person I see in the office. They're credible, and they know me. So they wouldn't send me something or create something for me that doesn't apply to me.
Yeah. Yeah, and also I like what you shared with me the other day, speaking about the paradox of using digital tools for more human connection. Can you expand on that thought? Because I think it's something that we really, especially during the pandemic, but also, and it's universal. It's really something we're looking for. This improving the human connection, especially at a distance, when you're using technology to connect, as we now do on this video call.
Right. Yeah. What I was saying was that I anticipate that there will be some pushback on using digital assets, digital explanations in medicine, because the threat is that you start to replace doctors with robots, right? And what I mean by a robot is a computer that has captured videos and content, and then it spits that out at the patient. And I think that's a legitimate concern. You could misuse technology and inappropriately replace human connection. There's a risk to that. However, the paradox that I've seen is that when I give my patients access to digital versions of my explanation, they have time before we meet to process their disease, to process what the treatments are going to be, what the options are, the risks, the side effects. And then when they come in to meet, we end up having a much more human moment where we don't need to spend a half hour going through the very rote recitation of anatomy and every little single side effect. We can condense that into a shorter period of time because they're coming in with a much higher baseline understanding. And so we spend more time on their questions about things like, I take care of my wife who has Alzheimer's and I'm her full-time caretaker. And so how can we tailor these treatment options that this man now understands to best accommodate his other considerations in his life? And or a patient who's got a disabled child who needs some special considerations around that. This using a digital asset for asynchronous patient education and capturing your explanation in a digital form that patients can consume whenever they want at home and share with family, opens the door to have these much more human moments in a way. I call it a paradox because I did not anticipate that. I mean, we're using recordings and technology in the clinic. I didn't necessarily anticipate that it would allow space for more of the doctoring part of what we do.
Yeah. And I bet it also frees your time resources, right? Because those videos that you create, they're not I guess meant for a single person, single patient. The library that you mentioned that you created might be reused. Those videos can be reused and shared with other patients. if they are appropriate to the treatment that you're suggesting. So you don't need to create a video each and every time. Rather, you're reusing, the way I understand it, reusing those assets when they are applicable to the case. Is that correct?
That's it. That's right. Yeah, that's it exactly. And so it's classic sort of scale and
Yeah,
leverage is the sort of concept where I explain something once and it can be viewed thousands of times, not just by my patients, but by patients all over the world. So it is intentionally light on nuance. It's not meant to be specific to a patient. It's intentionally kind of building just the foundation of the house. Okay. And then when the patient comes in, together, we kind of fill in the rest of the knowledge infrastructure that fills out the specific details of their disease and the features of their disease and how those features are going to kind of really pair up with the specifics of the treatment and the side effects. So while some people may be frustrated, well, this is kind of light on the details or light on nuance. That's of course intentional so that we can reuse the videos.
right.
And you're not, we don't want to be, it's supposed to save doctors time, as you said, and create time for these more kind of humanism moments. But in doing so, it eliminates the repetitive task of going through like the basics, like the 101 level stuff.
Yeah, yeah. Now, those benefits from both ends, patients and yours, are now clear to me. What other benefits you observe after replacing paper with this type of technology in your practice?
So you mentioned the pandemic before. One of the more obvious benefits has been, there's travel restrictions, there's visitor restrictions in the hospital. And so I have mostly elderly patients whose children live in different parts of the country and they're unable to come and physically join us. And so when I've used these digital explanations, I'm able to share them with geographically distant family so that they can kind of be more engaged. And I think it's been a very isolating experience, both for patients and families during the pandemic to live and kind of be diagnosed and get treatment during this very sort of restricted and isolated era. And so I've found that the digital explanations are kind of pulling the family unit a little bit tighter. It's bringing everybody in so that you don't need to physically be there to hear and see my explanation.
Yeah. Yeah, this is quite interesting. Yeah, thank you for sharing those thoughts and observation with us. I just wonder why telemedicine altogether is not embracing visuals quicker the way you do. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that doctors are generally they like technology. Obviously, they work in a technological field. However, it is hard to break habits, and so there was a lot of resistance to telemedicine before the pandemic, and it was just all they could do to kind of switch as a group to just start using telemedicine. And so there's been an incremental change where now more people are open to it. But to incorporate visual aids and so forth into that, when it was hard enough just to get them to just kind of log in in the first place, I think it will come, but I think it's just kind of a slow to change and breaking habits sort of situation. I would love to connect with people who work in that industry to kind of talk through some ideas about how to incorporate these kinds of things into telemedicine, because I think telemedicine is incredibly powerful. It's helped my patients a lot, but it's not the same as being in the office. But if you could introduce a digital illustrated component to it, then you bring it a little closer to the office moment, so I hope, to answer your question, I think it's because it's hard to break habits, but I'm optimistic that over time, and as sort of the younger generation of physicians comes up, they'll be more open to using this kind of digital visual explanation in the world of telemedicine. So I think it will happen. It will just take time.
I'm pretty sure you're right. These days, telemedicine perhaps is limited to just one channel of communication, or let's call it one modality, that is verbal explanation over the phone, let's say. But with addition to visuals, that is, seeing each other on a video call, and this new layer that you're using and spoke so much about, that is using the space to explain concepts visually, right? As both on videos and also in real life conversations. These will come, and you might be right, it's just a matter of habit and endorsing more of technology over time. And I hope our conversation will be kind of helpful in progress in that direction. So thanks again for sharing your thoughts.
Of course, yeah. Thank you so much for having me, and it's a real pleasure chatting with you.